Captain Maravalon stood at the helm of the Omen, Earth's most advanced warship, her gaze fixed on the approaching Veldari capital, the sprawling city-planet of Veldar. Her fingers hovered over the controls, her mind racing with the knowledge that this mission could either save or doom the galaxy. As the appointed peace envoy for Earth, Mara had seen the tension mounting between the Galactic Union and the Veldari Empire, two of the most powerful factions in the known universe. With a deadly war brewing in the stars, she had been chosen for this delicate task. But she knew she wasn't just representing Earth. She was carrying the weight of every civilization that hoped for peace. Her crew was quiet, focused, as the ship neared Veldar's orbit. A knot tightened in Mara's stomach, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had faced much worse in her career, and none of it had prepared her for the true gravity of this moment. She had seen the atrocities of war firsthand, the destruction, the bloodshed, the people who were lost in the blink of an eye. This peace conference was her final chance to ensure the galaxy didn't fall into that chaos. "Captain, we've received the first transmission," said Lieutenant Juno, her second in command, snapping Mara out of her thoughts. Mara nodded, tapping a few commands into the console. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the stern faces of the Veldari Council members. They weren't here to play games. The Veldari had a reputation for their unforgiving nature, and their distrust of humanity ran deep. Their empire had suffered at the hands of previous galactic wars, and they were determined not to let Earth's rising power tip the scales in favor of the Union. The Veldari leader, Prince Korath, a towering figure with eyes like molten amber, addressed Mara directly. "Captain Valen," his voice was cold, "we've agreed to this summit under duress. Do not mistake our willingness to negotiate for weakness." Mara met his gaze without flinching. "I understand, Prince Korath, but we both know that war will not benefit either of us. It's time to choose peace." Korath's lips curled into a small sneer. "We will see if your words hold true." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Mara took a deep breath, glancing at her team. They were the best and brightest, but they all understood what was at stake. She turned to Lieutenant Juno. "Prepare the delegation for landing. We need to be at the summit within the hour." Juno nodded, but there was an edge to her expression. "Captain, we've just received intel from Earth. There's been an attack on a Union vessel on the outskirts of the Veldari sector. They're claiming it was a rogue Veldari faction." A chill ran down Mara's spine. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but this. An attack, just as the peace talks were about to begin. "Damn it," Mara muttered under her breath. "That's exactly what we don't need. Juno, I want a full investigation. If this is what I think it is, we could be looking at a deliberate attempt to sabotage these talks." Juno didn't hesitate. "Understood. We'll track down the source of the attack." The tension between Earth and the Veldari was already razor-thin. Mara's instincts told her that this attack was no coincidence. Someone, either on Earth's side or within the Veldari, didn't want peace. Whoever was behind it, Mara would find them, even if it meant risking everything. As the Omen descended toward the surface of Veldar, Mara looked out at the dark expanse of space. The stars, once a symbol of limitless possibilities, now seemed to represent a future hanging by a thread. This was just the beginning. The Omen touched down on the gleaming surface of Veldar, the landing pad bathed in a mixture of alien blues and purples, reflecting the city's towering spires. The Veldari capital was a marvel of architecture, its structures a mix of organic curves and sharp metallic edges, as if the city itself had evolved alongside the Veldari people. Yet, despite its beauty, there was an unmistakable heaviness in the air, a sense of waiting, of something ominous lurking beneath the surface. Mara stepped off the ship, her boots making a soft clink against the metallic ground. She adjusted her military uniform, the insignia of Earth's command prominent on her chest. The Veldari representatives were already there, waiting for her. They were led by Prince Korath, his amber eyes still hard, his posture regal, and yet cold. His sharp gaze met hers as if measuring her very soul. "We are honored, Captain Valen," Korath said, though the words felt hollow. "Please, come with me. We have much to discuss." Mara nodded, masking her unease as she followed him into the heart of the Veldare government complex. Every step echoed through the grand halls, the soft hum of technology vibrating in the walls. It was here, in the grandest of palaces, where the future of the galaxy could be decided. But the words spoken between them were careful, each party towing the line of diplomacy, with no one daring to show their true intentions. At least, not yet. Inside the grand chamber, with its massive holographic displays and floating platforms, the summit began. Mara sat at the head of the table, the tension palpable in the air, her mind already working through the scenarios. Her crew sat off to the side, their eyes scanning the room for anything out of the ordinary. The discussions were stalled for the first few hours, with neither side willing to make significant concessions. The Veldare wanted assurances that Earth wouldn't use the peace talks as a way to expand its influence in the galaxy, while Earth's delegation demanded that the Veldare cease their expansion into contested territories. The negotiations were stagnating. Then, it happened. A shrill alarm echoed through the chamber, followed by the chaotic scramble of guards and officials rushing toward the walls, which flickered as red lights flooded the room. The holographic displays blinked out, replaced by a stark message in bold, flashing letters. CQRITBREHH DETCTED MNNT38. What's happening? Mara demanded, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side, though she knew better than to draw it in front of Veldare officials. Prince Korath's face paled. The breach is coming from within the city's security grid. Someone has gained access to our systems. A tense silence fell over the room. Mara's instincts flared. This was no accident. This wasn't just an external attack. It was something far worse. Whoever was behind this breach had the resources and knowledge to bypass the Veldare's highly advanced security systems. It was a calculated move, and the more she thought about it, the more it felt like sabotage. Someone wanted this summit to fail, and they weren't just targeting Earth's interests. "Captain Valen," Korath said, his voice sharp, "we are under attack. You and your people must come with me. We have to secure the council chambers before the saboteurs make their move." Mara's heart raced. She nodded, gesturing for her crew to follow. "Stay sharp. This isn't just an attack on us. It's an attack on peace itself." The corridors outside the council chamber were a blur of activity. Mara's team moved swiftly, clearing the path ahead, but every step was filled with uncertainty. The walls shimmered with holographic screens, but they flickered intermittently as the sabotage began to spread. Suddenly, Mara's comms lit up with a transmission from Lieutenant Juno. "Captain, you need to hear this. We've located the rogue faction's signal. It's coming from within your own delegation." The words hit Mara like a slap to the face. Betrayal. A treacherous whisper of doubt slid into her mind. She had trusted these people, and now, one of them was working against everything they stood for. But who? As they approached the control center, Mara's mind was racing. The sabotage was a clever maneuver, something designed to leave them scrambling. An attack on their unity. The deeper the conspiracy went, the more personal it became. Someone in her own ranks was behind this, and she would find out who, no matter the cost. The control center was a maze of glowing panels and holographic interfaces, every surface alive with information, yet cloaked in a palpable sense of urgency. Mara's boots clicked against the polished floor as she strode toward the main console, her mind still reeling from Juno's revelation. A traitor among her own delegation. It felt like the walls were closing in as her fingers moved swiftly over the console, pulling up encrypted communications logs and security protocols. She scanned them, but her thoughts were still on the betrayal, the feeling of someone she had trusted working in the shadows against everything she had worked for. "Captain, we've isolated the signal. Juno's voice crackled over the comms, still tense. "It's coming from." Before she could finish, an explosion rocked the building. The lights flickered, and the ground beneath them trembled. A deafening sound reverberated through the halls, followed by the sound of shouts and the sharp crackle of weapons being fired. "Go! Move! Move! Move!" Mara ordered, as the air thickened with tension. She drew her sidearm in one smooth motion, a sense of duty overtaking her. "Captain, Juno's voice cut off abruptly. There was static. Then the call disconnected. "Damn it," Mara muttered under her breath, fighting the urge to panic. "Juno, report in." The response came from an unexpected source. One of the Veldari guards, a tall, wiry figure, barged into the room. His amber eyes were wide, a bead of sweat running down his forehead as he dropped to one knee. "Prince Korath, he's gone. We've lost him." He gasped for breath, his words disjointed. "There's a double agent in the palace. We need to retreat. Now." Mara's mind flashed back to the conversation with Korath just hours before. His cold demeanor, the distrust, the tension. It had all felt off, but she hadn't suspected that he might have been a target. Now, with the prince missing and her own forces compromised, Mara could feel the weight of the situation crashing down on her. "We can't retreat," Mara said firmly, her voice laced with determination. "Not until we find the traitor and stop whatever they're planning." The guard stood, shaking his head, his face twisted in frustration. "Captain, with all due respect, this is bigger than you understand. They've breached our inner defenses. We've lost control. The city's under siege." Mara's pulse quickened, but she didn't allow herself to flinch. She could feel the pulse of the galaxy itself, the lifeblood of thousands of civilizations, pressing against her shoulders. The weight of it was overwhelming, but it was why she had fought her way to the top. It was why she had earned this role. Peace for all, no matter the cost. "Where are the rest of my crew?" she demanded, her voice snapping with authority. "They're outside, Captain," the guard responded quickly. "But they're pinned down by gunfire. We don't have much time." Mara turned to her team, who were still working frantically to unlock the control systems. She had to make a choice. The traitor had to be found. But so did the real threat. Was this sabotage just a means of distraction? Had the true enemy already made their move, or was this all part of a larger plan to undermine the peace process before it could even begin? With a deep breath, Mara made her decision. "Prepare for extraction," she ordered. "We're going after the traitor. Stay close and stay quiet. We don't know who's with us and who's against us." Her crew nodded in unison, their resolve hardening. Despite the chaos around them, they were trained for moments like this, moments where everything seemed to break apart, but they still had to hold on, no matter what. They moved swiftly through the corridors, the air thick with tension. But Mara couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The galaxy, on the brink of peace, teetered dangerously toward war once again. If she didn't act quickly, everything she had worked for would be destroyed. As they turned a corner, a soft click echoed through the halls. It was a familiar sound, the sound of a weapon being primed. Mara's heart raced as she motioned for her crew to take cover. She was about to face the very people who had infiltrated the peace summit, and she wasn't going to let them tear it all apart. The soft click of the weapon priming sent a jolt of tension through the air. Mara's instincts kicked into overdrive. She motioned for her team to scatter, diving behind nearby pillars and holographic columns. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the hallway for movement, her pulse steady despite the chaos. Whoever had triggered that weapon wasn't a rookie. They knew how to make an entrance, and they knew how to make an exit. Her fingers tightened around the grip of her sidearm, every fiber of her being screamed that this was no random ambush. The traitors within the Veldari palace were orchestrating something much more elaborate. The weapon priming wasn't just for show. It was the signal of an attack, of a final strike against everything Mara had worked for. She motioned to Lieutenant Drax, her sharp-eyed second-in-command, who had already taken cover on the opposite side of the hall. He gave a subtle nod, signaling that he had eyes on the figure who'd triggered the weapon. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line as she signaled for Drax to move forward. The team's training kicked in, and the air around them seemed to shimmer with their synchronized steps. They didn't need words. They didn't need commands. They were a unit, a force bound by a single purpose. Drax moved silently, his footsteps barely a whisper against the polished floor. He reached the corner, the hallway stretching before him like an open wound, but there was no movement. No sign of the attacker. It was too quiet. "Stay sharp," Mara whispered into the comms. Her voice was steady but low, the tension in her veins not fully masked by her calm demeanor. "We're not alone." But then came the voice, a cold, metallic sound over the comms, chilling in its detachment. "Captain Valen, you're too late." Mara's heart skipped a beat. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It was the voice of someone she had trusted, someone who had been by her side through every mission, every negotiation. Juno, her lieutenant, her most trusted officer, had been the one behind the sabotage, the one working to bring down the peace talks. Mara's world shattered for a moment. The years of camaraderie, the trust they had built over countless campaigns, all of it was a lie. Juno had been playing her. No, worse, she had been playing them all. "You?" Mara hissed, the shock transforming into fury. How long has this been your plan?" The comms crackled, and the answer came in a low, mocking tone. "Since the moment we arrived, Captain. You just never saw it. It was always going to end this way. Peace is a lie. The galaxy can never be united under one banner. It's only a matter of who's strong enough to claim dominion." A sickening chill swept through Mara. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever imagined. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a galaxy-shattering conspiracy. Juno wasn't just against Earth. She was against the very idea of peace itself. She wanted control, and she was willing to burn everything down to get it. "We were family," Mara shouted, her voice cracking as the weight of the betrayal sank deeper. "Family." Juno's laugh was cold, hollow. "You were always just a pawn, Captain, just like the rest of them. I don't need family. I need power." Before Mara could react, the sound of gunfire echoed from the far end of the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps retreating quickly. Drax's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, we've got a breach. We're surrounded. They're everywhere." Mara's mind raced as she processed the news. Juno had set the stage for a full-blown attack. It was all part of her plan, to take control, to dismantle the peace process and place herself at the top of the heap. But not if Mara could stop her. "We're not giving up," Mara snapped, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "We fight for the peace we've built. We fight for the galaxy." She signaled to her team. They weren't just going to track down a traitor anymore. They were going to end this, before Juno could ignite the chaos she had planned for the entire galaxy. Mara's eyes burned with determination. The fight had just begun, and she would see it through to the bitter end. Juno had made a grave mistake. Earth's last hero wouldn't let this galaxy fall into darkness. Not on her watch. Mara's heart pounded as she sprinted down the hall, her crew at her back, weapons drawn. The air was thick with tension, and the distant sounds of gunfire and chaos echoed throughout the palace. Juno's betrayal weighed heavily on her shoulders, but there was no time to dwell. The mission hadn't changed. Protect the peace, stop the traitors, and save the galaxy from descending into war. As they reached the central chamber, Mara felt the sharp sting of realization. The peace talks had been a carefully laid trap. Every step, every word exchanged in good faith had been manipulated. And now, at the very heart of the negotiations, Juno was poised to strike the final blow. "We need to move fast," Mara ordered, her voice hard as steel. Her eyes locked with Drax's, the silent communication between them still as sharp as ever. He nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. The corridors were eerily quiet now. Too quiet. It felt like the calm before the storm. The team had cleared the immediate areas, but Mara knew that Juno had already anticipated their moves. They would be waiting, hidden in the shadows, watching, ready to strike. As they approached the Grand Hall, where the Peace Summit had been held just hours before, Mara's mind raced. Juno had been part of the team. She had been their insider, their eyes and ears on the inside. The thought of her being behind this was an unbearable betrayal, one that cut deeper than any blade ever could. "We can't take chances," Mara said, her voice low but commanding. "Scan every corner. Check for traps." They moved cautiously, a well-oiled machine in perfect synchronization. Their footsteps were almost silent, drowned out by the muffled sounds of the battle raging outside the palace. The Grand Hall loomed ahead, its massive doors still open, like a gaping wound waiting to be explored. Mara pushed the doors open, the heavy sound of them groaning in protest as they parted. Inside, the once stately hall was in ruins. The grand tables where representatives from dozens of worlds had sat were overturned, debris scattered across the floor. The holographic projection of peace had been shattered, replaced by the flickering red lights of emergency systems. The air was thick with tension, the stench of betrayal almost palpable. "Juno," Mara called out, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "Show yourself." A flicker of movement in the shadows was all the warning they got. The next second, blinding gunfire ripped through the air, forcing them to dive for cover. The sound of bullets ricocheted off the walls as Mara instinctively pulled her team to safety behind an overturned table. The walls around them cracked as the rounds slammed into the stone. "Get to the consoles," Drax shouted, his voice harsh. "We need to lock this place down." Mara nodded, her mind working quickly. She had to get to the central command terminal. It was the only way to override the system, lock down the palace, and stop Juno's plot before it could spread. But every move was a gamble. Juno had already anticipated this, and there was no telling what traps lay ahead. As they made their way toward the command center, another explosion shook the building, this one closer than before. Mara's vision blurred as dust and debris filled the air, but she kept moving, her hand gripping her weapon tightly. She couldn't let fear take hold. Not now, not when the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. In the distance, Mara saw a figure silhouetted against the fiery glow of the palace's collapsing exterior. It was Juno, standing tall and confident, her weapon aimed directly at the heart of the room. "You think you can stop me?" Juno's voice was filled with venom, a cruel mockery of their former camaraderie. "This is bigger than you, Captain. This is the galaxy's true future. No more peace. No more unity. Only strength. Only power." Mara's grip on her weapon tightened, her breath coming in short bursts. This was it, the moment of reckoning. But she wouldn't let Juno destroy everything. She couldn't. "I'll stop you, Juno," Mara said, her voice unwavering. "Not for the galaxy you think you deserve, but for the one I believe in. A galaxy united in peace. You'll never win." Juno's laugh echoed through the chamber, dark and hollow. "You're already too late," she sneered. "The storm has already begun." As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Mara realized with chilling clarity, this wasn't just a coup. It was the opening move in a war that would consume everything she had fought for. The chamber was heavy with the weight of their confrontation, the air thick with the electric hum of Juno's weapon. Her eyes, cold and calculating, glinted with the promise of destruction. Mara stood firm, her stance unyielding, even as the enormity of the situation pressed down on her. Juno had already fired the first shot. Now it was Mara's turn to end it. "You've lost, Juno," Mara said, her voice sharp. "You're fighting for a future that will never exist. You're fighting against the galaxy's chance for peace. Juno's expression twisted into a smirk, the corners of her lips curling with bitter satisfaction. "You still don't understand, do you? There will be no peace. Not after what's coming. The galaxy is fractured, and no amount of bleeding heart diplomacy will ever mend it. Strength, Mara. That's the only thing that matters. The strong survive, and the weak bow to them." "You've been blind to what we've built," Mara replied, her voice steady, despite the chaos swirling in her mind. "We've built something greater than strength. We've built unity, cooperation. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning, a way forward. You're so focused on power, you can't see it." Juno took a step closer, her weapon still raised, but her voice was no longer calm. It was a crescendo of anger. "And you, Mara Valen, are so naive. A soldier, always fighting for the greater good. But you never learned what it takes to lead, to rule. It's not about unity, not about peace. It's about dominance, about bending the galaxy to your will. You think you've won, but this galaxy will never accept your dream of peace, and I'll make sure of it." The weight of her words hit Mara like a physical blow. The years of sacrifice, the countless lives lost in the pursuit of this peace, it all seemed to hang in the balance with Juno's twisted vision. But Mara refused to falter. She wasn't about to let Juno, or anyone else, dictate the future of the galaxy. Juno raised her weapon, and the crack of a shot rang out, cutting through the tension of the room. But it wasn't aimed at Mara. "Drax!" Mara shouted, her heart leaping into her throat as she saw her second-in-command collapse to the floor, clutching his chest. The blood spread rapidly, staining the floor around him as he gasped for air. "No!" Mara cried, rushing to his side. But before she could reach him, another round of gunfire erupted from the shadows. The team was under heavy fire, trapped between Juno and the perimeter defenses that had been activated throughout the palace. Mara glanced up, her face set in grim determination. Drax's life was slipping away before her eyes, but there was no time to mourn. They needed to stop this madness. Now, get him out of here, Mara shouted, her voice booming over the chaos. "Now, I'll hold them off." But as her team scrambled to evacuate Drax, Mara's eyes never left Juno. She could feel the weight of her own resolve sharpening within her, the urge to end this once and for all. Juno's laugh echoed through the chamber, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. "You think you can stop me? You're already too late, Mara. The countdown has already begun. You've seen the preparations. You've seen the weapons we've set in place. Once they activate, the galaxy will burn." Mara's breath came in shallow gasps, her mind working furiously. She couldn't let Juno get away with this. She couldn't let her destroy everything they had worked for. "You may think you've won, Juno, but you've made one mistake." Mara's eyes narrowed, her voice hard as stone. "You underestimated me." And in that moment, everything changed. Mara moved with a speed and precision that surprised even herself. She dove for cover behind a shattered console as another barrage of fire erupted in her direction. Then, with a sharp twist of her wrist, she activated the emergency override, the signal that would cut through the palace's defensive systems and shut down Juno's weapons. For a moment, the room went silent, the only sound the rapid thumping of Mara's heart. The systems flickered, the overhead lights pulsing in time with the staccato of her own breath. And then the countdown clock, visible on every screen, paused. Juno's face twisted in disbelief. "No." "Yes," Mara said, rising from behind the console, her gun aimed straight at Juno's heart. "It's over." But as Mara took a step forward, the warning lights blazed red again. Her pulse quickened. Something was wrong. "Not quite yet, Captain," Juno sneered. Her eyes glinted with something more dangerous than victory. "You're too late." Mara's eyes widened as the warning lights intensified, flashing like an oncoming storm. The countdown, which had halted for a brief, hopeful moment, now resumed with alarming speed. A deep rumble echoed through the palace, and the ground beneath Mara's feet seemed to shudder in response. The systems had overridden her emergency command. "You thought you could stop me." Juno's voice was thick with contempt as she stepped forward, her weapon still trained on Mara. "You were never meant to win, Mara. I've already set the course. The galaxy's fate is sealed." Mara's heart skipped a beat as the true horror of Juno's scheme dawned on her. The weapons. Juno hadn't just prepared them. She had triggered them. The countdown wasn't just a system reboot. It was a countdown to a cataclysm. "Your peace," Juno continued, her voice laced with venom, "was always a dream. And dreams must end." Mara's mind raced. She couldn't let this be the end. Not when the cost had already been too high. Not after all they had sacrificed. She glanced over at Drax, who was barely conscious, his blood pooling beneath him as the medics worked frantically to stabilize him. Every second counted, but the threat of destruction loomed large over them. "There's still time," Mara whispered to herself. Her eyes locked onto the central control panel, now flashing red with warnings. The countdown had reached its final phase, but it wasn't too late. It couldn't be. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The room was filled with a deafening hum, the walls vibrating as if the very palace was alive, preparing to unleash its deadly payload. She had to trust her instincts. She had to finish what they'd started. Turning toward Juno, Mara held her ground. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. "You think you can bend the galaxy to your will, but there's something you don't understand. It's not about strength, Juno. It's about will. The will to fight for something greater than ourselves. The will to protect what we've built." Juno scoffed, taking another step forward. "The galaxy doesn't need your will, Mara. It needs power. And power is mine to command." Before Mara could respond, a loud crack filled the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of explosions from outside the palace. The entire building shook violently, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the decimated hall. The palace's exterior defenses had been breached. An assault was underway. "This is it," Juno muttered, her voice tinged with manic satisfaction. "The final chapter in this pathetic story. Let the galaxy burn. Let them realize the futility of peace." But as she spoke, something shifted in Mara. The familiar tension in her chest became something else, something sharper. She had no more time to argue, no more time to waste. Juno's plan, whatever it was, had to be stopped. In a blur of motion, Mara lunged forward, her weapon aimed at Juno, but the traitor was fast. She sidestepped, narrowly dodging the shot that rang out. The two women locked eyes for a brief moment, each of them understanding the gravity of what was at stake. With a swift motion, Mara dropped to the ground, rolling to the side and positioning herself for a clear shot at the control panel. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her focus was singular. The palace walls, once a symbol of diplomacy, now felt like a tomb, a grave for their dreams of peace. But even in the face of certain destruction, Mara knew that the fight wasn't over. She could still turn this around. She could still save the galaxy. The countdown reached its final 5 seconds. With a single, calculated move, Mara fired at the central console. Sparks flew, and the room was filled with a blinding flash of light. The lights dimmed to a haunting glow as the emergency systems whirred back to life. The countdown screen flickered, its numbers reversing as the catastrophic force was shut down. For a brief, hopeful moment, the room was silent. But it didn't last. A soft beep echoed from the terminal, followed by a message flashing on the screen. "Override failure. Protocol initiated. Countdown cannot be stopped." Mara's stomach churned. The palace had been set to destroy itself, along with everything in its wake. Juno's laughter filled the room, a dark, victorious sound that echoed in Mara's ears. "You failed, Mara. The weapons are already armed. There's nothing you can do now." Mara's heart sank. The war she had tried to prevent, the peace she had fought for, it was slipping away. But something inside her refused to accept it. She wasn't done yet. Not yet, she muttered, determination flooding her veins. I'm not done yet. The message from the terminal continued to blink ominously. Override failure. Protocol initiated. Countdown cannot be stopped. Mara's mind raced as she took in the weight of the situation. Time was running out, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Juno's victorious laugh rang in her ears like the tolling of a bell. You're out of time, Mara. You've always been too late. Her words were cold, filled with a malice that ran deeper than Mara had ever imagined. The weapons are armed. The galaxy will burn. There's nothing you can do now. Mara's gaze never wavered from the terminal. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped her weapon, but the fire in her eyes burned with unrelenting determination. She wasn't done yet. She couldn't let it end like this. Not after everything. Drax was still unconscious, his life hanging by a thread. Her team was scattered, hiding behind cover, taking fire from Juno's forces. But despite the chaos, Mara focused. The countdown was already past the point of no return, but the system's backup protocol. There had to be another way. She just had to find it. The idea came to her with sudden clarity. If she could reach the core systems, the primary control center, she might be able to trigger an emergency shutdown manually, bypassing the digital lock that Juno had imposed. There was a chance. Mara's eyes flicked to Juno, whose smirk had faltered, replaced now with an almost eerie calm. Juno had given her every opportunity to fail. But this time, Mara wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. She would fight until her last breath. You're too focused on the end, Juno, Mara said, her voice steady. But I'm focused on the beginning. The one thing you'll never understand. The will to rebuild. To rise from the ashes. Juno's expression tightened, her eyes flashing with anger. Enough of your speeches, Mara. It's over. As Juno raised her weapon, aiming directly at Mara, the sharp screech of alarms filled the room. The final countdown had reached its final seconds. The palace trembled once again, this time with an intensity that made Mara's knees almost buckle. The floor beneath them groaned, as if the very building were buckling under the strain of what was to come. In that moment, Mara knew the truth. There was no time for heroics. The systems were locked into a death spiral. The weapons would trigger in mere moments, destroying everything in its path. And no matter how many lives had been sacrificed to stop this war, nothing would matter if the galaxy was erased in one sweeping blow. Mara sprinted toward the central control station, ignoring the gunfire that splintered the walls around her. She could hear Juno yelling something behind her, but it was drowned out by the rush of adrenaline flooding her veins. She didn't look back. There was no time. She reached the control station, her fingers dancing over the terminals with practiced precision. But the interface was locked. Another barrier. Another attempt to stop her. Damn it, she hissed, pulling a hidden blade from her vest. With one swift motion, she cut through the emergency wires, sparks flying in all directions. Her breath was ragged, but she didn't stop. If she could just access the primary systems. Suddenly, an explosion shook the room, throwing her to the ground. The lights flickered and then died completely, leaving the room bathed only in the glow of the countdown screen. Mara scrambled to her feet, her vision blurred by the blast's aftershocks. She reached out, hands shaking, and with a desperate push, she activated the emergency protocol. Shutdown initiated. The words flashed on the screen, but it was too late. The palace rumbled, and the overwhelming sound of the weapon charging up filled her ears. Mara, no, Juno screamed, her voice full of fury. But Mara wasn't listening anymore. There was only one choice left. A final sacrifice. Mara placed her hand on the central button. The only way to truly stop the weapons. The only way to disable everything. But there was a catch. It would require a life to fuel the shutdown. Only one soul could override the system's core. Mara knew, with agonizing clarity, that she was the one who would have to pay the price. I'm sorry, she whispered to her team, to Drax, to Earth, to the future they had all fought for. She took a deep breath, her body tensing as the countdown neared its final seconds. Her hand pressed down. The world seemed to hold its breath. The lights blinked, dimmed, and then flickered out. Silence followed. The weapons powered down. And Maravalon, the last martyr, fell.